Jeylen's return to the boutique was calm, but beneath it simmered a fury he could no longer contain. With him was Elaine, his lawyer, the one who never lost a fight. The steps they took weren't just a protest. They were a revenge set to explode. What happened next will shock you. It's not just payback. It's pure catharsis. But let's start from the beginning. Jeylen Brooks stepped into the boutique, the polished wood floors creaking beneath his designer shoes. The sleek, minimalist decor of the Madison Avenue store matched his own image, refined, successful, and accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. His suit was tailored to perfection, his presence commanding respect. This wasn't just a man strolling into a shop. It was a client with money and power. But as soon as he crossed the threshold, the atmosphere shifted. The air became heavier, colder. The saleswoman behind the counter, a tall blonde woman in her mid-30s, barely looked up from her clipboard. Her name was Karen, and the moment she glanced at Jeylen, her expression soured. Her eyes quickly scanned him, her lips tightening into an almost imperceptible sneer. Jeylen, momentarily taken aback, approached her with a polite smile. "Excuse me, could I get some assistance?" Karen didn't even try to hide the disdain in her voice. "I'm sorry, we're not serving today," she said, her words clipped and devoid of any warmth. There was no hint of apology, no attempt to soften the blow. It was as if she had already made up her mind about him, before he'd even spoken a word. Jeylen stood still for a moment, his mind racing. The shock morphed into disbelief. He'd spent years building his career, working harder than most, and yet here he was, dismissed as if he were invisible. Her tone wasn't about his status, his clothes, or his money. It was something far more insidious, something that ran deeper. This wasn't a rejection based on class or taste. This was a rejection based on race. "Excuse me?" Jeylen's voice was laced with confusion and anger. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid I am," Karen said coldly, dismissing him with a flick of her wrist, as though he were an inconvenience she'd rather forget. Stunned, Jeylen stood there for a moment longer, watching the silent judgment in the eyes of other patrons. Then, wordlessly, he turned and walked out of the store. The door closed behind him with a finality that echoed in his mind. The humiliation lingered, settling heavy in his chest. Jeylen stormed out of the boutique, his feet pounding against the sidewalk, each step a burst of raw, pent-up anger. His chest tightened with a burning, suffocating fury. The sting of Karen's words, the casual dismissal, echoed in his mind with every stride. This wasn't just about one woman's personal prejudice. No. This was about something much deeper, something he had faced countless times before, being treated as less than, being diminished simply because of the color of his skin. The sting of it wasn't new, but today it felt different. Today, he refused to let it slide. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly as he unlocked the screen. It was a message from Marcus. Did she really do that? For a moment, Jeylen stood still, his gaze fixed on the screen, as though the text was some sort of confirmation he wasn't imagining it. His breath was shallow, but his anger, though burning hot, was focused now. He typed back quickly, his fingers striking the keys with purpose. "Yeah, but she'll regret it." The response, brief but loaded, left no room for doubt. He wasn't just angry, he was resolved. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the determination that coursed through his veins. He wasn't going to let this go. Not today. Not when the weight of every other similar experience he'd suffered seemed to converge on this single, humiliating moment. Jeylen didn't slow his pace. His jaw clenched, his eyes steely with the certainty of his resolve. The boutique was just a few blocks away, but it felt like a lifetime before he reached the entrance. His mind raced. He could almost hear Karen's voice in his head, that cold dismissal. But now,
He wasn't walking away in shame. He wasn't retreating into the silence of being unseen. No. This time, he would make sure she understood. He would make sure that woman understood what it meant to treat someone like less than. As the boutique came into view, Jeylen's hands curled into fists. His heart pounded in his chest, but this time, it wasn't fear or frustration that fueled him. It was a quiet, seething justice. He wasn't leaving until she faced the consequences. An hour later, Jeylen returned to the boutique, but this time, there was no trace of the anger that had consumed him before. His expression was unreadable, sharp, and deliberate. The fire within him had cooled, replaced by a calculated calm that seemed to demand respect. He no longer walked alone. At his side was Elaine Harris, his business partner, a formidable presence. Standing tall with a confident stride, Elaine exuded an air of authority that could silence any room. As a partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, she was no stranger to making people listen, especially when it came to matters of justice. As they entered, Karen was behind the counter, and the moment she saw Jeylen, her face went pale. Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition and fear flashing across her features. She had no idea what was about to unfold. Jeylen moved closer, his demeanor unflinching, while Elaine calmly flashed her business card, the gold-embossed letters catching the light. "I believe you owe my client an apology," Elaine said, her voice crisp and professional, with none of the emotion that had been evident in Jeylen's earlier outburst. "We'll be filing a formal complaint against your discriminatory actions." Jeylen's gaze locked with Karen's, unyielding and steady. His voice, now devoid of the frustration from earlier, was cold, but there was power in every word. "You messed with the wrong person," he said quietly, his tone sending a subtle but unmistakable warning. The commotion didn't go unnoticed. The boutique's owner appeared from the back, his face shifting from confusion to instant recognition. As soon as he laid eyes on Jeylen, the air in the room changed. Jeylen was a name everyone in the city knew, a high-net-worth client with influence and connections. The owner's concern was palpable. His eyes flicked nervously between Jeylen, Elaine, and Karen as the reality of the situation sank in. The owner stammered an apology, his voice forced and unconvincing. He tried to salvage what was left of his boutique's reputation, but the damage had already been done. Karen, on the other hand, remained speechless, her gaze cast downward, unable to meet Jeylen's eyes. She had miscalculated, thinking she could get away with her behavior. Now, she realized too late. Her actions would cost her far more than she ever anticipated. The following week, the boutique's management made a public apology to Jeylen, offering him a private shopping experience and a personal stylist for free. However, it wasn't just the apology that left Jeylen satisfied. He had taken his case to social media, and the response was overwhelming. Articles were written, influencers shared their stories of similar treatment, and the story became a viral rallying cry for justice. Karen, on the other hand, found herself at the center of a growing backlash. Her social media accounts were flooded with criticisms, and soon after, the boutique had no choice but to terminate her employment. It wasn't just the loss of her job, it was the public shaming, the realization that her prejudice had cost her everything. Jeylen, standing in the boutique once again, but this time as a victor, could only smile. Justice had been served, not by violence or anger, but by the strength of truth and the quiet power of standing up for what was right.